What is up guys, Top Tier Yu-Gi-Oh here, and today we are in classic Top Tier Yu-Gi-Oh mode. It's been a long time since I've done a video like this, but with Soul Fusion coming out soon, I'm very excited about a lot of the new support we're getting for older archetypes, as well as some of the new archetypes that they're introducing. And one of the things that excites me the most about this set is the new Orcust archetype, which consists of all Dark Machine monsters, and the main deck ones have graveyard effects that allow you to special summon them from various zones. And then the Link monsters, which are extremely easy to make, they have protection based on whether or not they're linked, and they get pretty cool effects as well. And so let's go ahead and get into the deck profile, and then within that I'm going to talk about all the effects, some different interactions, and what I think is the best, if not at least the most fun version of the deck. And so getting into the deck profile, first we have 3 Orcust base Bombird, because you know he is bombing the base in the church with the stained glass windows, but he has a really cool effect to where you banish it from the graveyard and special summon 1 Orcust monster from your hand except for himself, and then for the rest of the turn you cannot special summon except for dark monsters. And then it's once per turn just like all of the other Orcust effects, but he's really good because you play so many Orcust monsters, this helps you summon them from your hand and then make more Link monsters and then so on. Next we have 3 Orcust symbol skeleton, and he is a skeleton with symbols attached. He's going in on the cymbals on the drums. And he's very similar to base Bombird, except for he special summons from the graveyard. And so you banish him from the graveyard, you target 1 Orcust monster in the graveyard and special summon it. And this is including the Link monsters too, which again we'll get to a bit later. Next we have 3 Orcust Harp Haro, who is a dragon for some reason with like harp wings. And his effect is that you can special summon from the deck. And so with these 3 monsters you can special summon from the hand, graveyard, and from the deck, and so your engine is pretty good, which is always a good start for any sort of archetype. You always want to have a really good established engine that helps you move your cards around from the various zones of the game. You want to be able to move them from your hand to the field, from the graveyard to the field, from the deck to the field, and then also from the hand to the graveyard, graveyard to hand, etc. There are lots of ways to move your cards around, and your engine allows you to do that. And as we can see with just these 3 cards, we have a pretty solid base of an engine right here. But there is more. And so moving on, we do have the new World Legacy card, World Legacy Wonder Wand. Wonder Wand has a long effect, but in summary, what this does for the deck mostly is that if it's in the graveyard, you can banish it, and then special summon 1 of your Orcust monsters from the Banished Zone. And then like the other ones, you also can't summon except for dark monsters for the rest of the turn. It does have another effect though, to where if it's sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 World Legacy monster from your hand. This is something that doesn't really come up as often, but it is something to keep in mind. And so the first 10 monsters have graveyard effects, and so the next 3 to 5 monsters are going to allow us to get those effects off. And so next we have 3 Armageddon Knights. Armageddon Knight is just a staple in this deck, I think. When summoned, you dump a dark monster to the graveyard. It just helps you get all of your Orcust effects off. It's really good. It's really good, especially considering the summon restriction that all the Orcust monsters give you, to where you can't special summon it except for dark monsters. Having a dark monster that you can special summon later on within your combos sometimes comes up and can be really useful, and so Armageddon Knight is the perfect card for this deck. Next we have 2 Scrap Recyclers, which is very similar to Armageddon Knight, and it's when normal or special summoned, you can send 1 machine type monster from your deck to the graveyard. And it has another effect to where once per turn you can shuffle 2 level 4 Earth Machine monsters from your graveyard into the deck and draw, but because we only play 2 Earth Machine monsters, this effect is actually impossible to resolve in this deck, as currently built. If we were to add in a 3rd copy, then we could do it, but even then it would be very rare. But the main reason that this card is in the deck is as a pseudo Armageddon Knight, to where we can normal summon this, dump any of our Orcust monsters, and then pretty much start going off from there. And now you have another option that I think is a similarly good choice, and that's Mathematician. And Mathematician does something very similar, but it only dumps level 4 or lower monsters. And so Armageddon Knight dumps any dark monster, and so we can send any of our Orcust monsters or Wonder Wand. Scrap Recycler dumps any machine monster, so again any of our Orcust monsters and Wonder Wand. And then we have another option, which is again the Mathematician, which only dumps level 4 or lower, so we can still dump any of our Orcust monsters, but we can't dump Wonder Wand. And that's the reason why I didn't play Mathematician. But one thing about Mathematician that's good is when it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, then you can draw a card, and that comes up sometimes to when if your opponent has any sort of interruption. If your opponent is interrupting your plays, like if they ash your Armageddon Knight or ash your Scrap Recycler, sometimes that just ends your turn, and having like another way to at least get the card out of that is good. So I do like Mathematician in that regard, especially when it gets ashed. But outside of that, Mathematician isn't that useful compared to the others, especially considering that Armageddon Knight and Scrap Recycler both work when they're special summoned as well, which also can come up. So if you Monster Reborn it back, or we have another card that's similar to Monster Reborn in the deck that we'll get to later, but if you special summon it, you still get the effect, and that does come up. Next we have 3 World Legacy World Crowns. This is a really good extender for the deck because it's also a Dark Machine. The only downside is that it's like level 7 or something, and that can sometimes make it a brick if you already can't play, but if you're able to play, this definitely helps all of them. And so what it does is you can special summon this card from your hand to the field and defense to a zone a link monster points to. And so it's really just a free link material, but that's really important in this deck, and it's also important that it's a Dark Machine, because again, you can only special summon darks, and then it being a Dark Machine allows you to go into Summon Sorceress, and then also use this with Summon Sorceress to summon more other things from your deck. And so World Crown is definitely really useful. I wasn't a fan at first, but the more I played it, the more I realized that it just really helps a lot. It also has another effect that when a monster in the field that was special summoned from the extra deck activates the effect, you can tribute World Crown to negate that activation and then destroy that card. And so it can be an extender, or it can even be defense sometimes. And so again, if your plays get disrupted, this can be a really useful monster just to summon and then sit on. It's got a solid 2000 defense, and your opponent will usually have to make a link play to out it. And if they do that, then you can just, negate their link monster's effect, and then maybe survive the turn and be able to play next turn. And so that's sometimes all you can ask for. And I really enjoy playing World Crown because it can serve multiple roles, and that's exactly what we want in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And then the final monsters are hand traps. We have 2 Ash Blossoms and 2 Ghost Ogres. I'm playing these ratios because I determined that 4 hand traps was ideal, and so instead of going with a 3-to-1 hand trap ratio, I wanted to eliminate the possibility of drawing multiples of a single one, since consistency is one of my issues with this deck. I wanted to go with something that will work more often, and so the 2-2 ratio was a bit better in my opinion. I think you could debate which hand traps are the best right now. I think none of them are like amazing, but I think you just want a variety of defenses. And so I think you could have easily chosen Bell over any 2 of these, or you could have gone with really anything, but I thought these were probably the best ones. Moving on to the spell cards, we have 2 Orcust Babel, or Babel. Babel sounds kind of stupid. I'm going to go with Babel, or Babel. I don't know, but 2 field spells. And the field spell is easily the most important spell card in the entire deck. What it does is it turns all of your Orcust monsters into quick effects, which is huge. And then also, during your main phase, except for the turn it was sent to the graveyard, you can discard a card from your hand, or send a card from your hand to the graveyard, and then add this from your graveyard to your hand. And so that's also a really useful effect, because not only is it good, but it means that your opponent can't really effectively get rid of it, because you can just add it back to your hand. And then adding it back to your hand, it also allows you to move cards from your hand to the graveyard. And that's another example of the engine allowing you to move cards from different zones. Next we have 2 Orcust EINSATZ. Also not sure how to pronounce this one. I think this is like a music thing, so if any of you musicians watching, let me know how to pronounce this, because I have no idea. But what this does is when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can take an Orcust or World Legacy monster from your hand or deck and either send it to the graveyard or banish it. And then, like everything else, it's once per turn. But this is really good because, again, it's another engine card that moves your cards from where you want them to be. One thing that I really like about this card is that they could have just made it a generic send from the deck to the graveyard, and then we can use the graveyard effects to get them to the Banished Zone, and your link monsters want them banished, by the way, but instead of doing that, they allow us to just directly send them from the deck to the Banished Zone, which can sometimes help us get more in the Banished Zone versus having to send them to the graveyard first, since the graveyard effects are once per turn. And so I think they really put a lot of thought into this card and made it exactly what it needed to be. Definitely one of my favorites. And now I wasn't a big fan of it at first, because if you just kind of look at it for face value, it seems to be the type of card to where like it doesn't extend your plays, it doesn't give you defense, it doesn't, there are a lot of things that it doesn't do, that if we look at it from the lens of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, it's sort of a not good card. And I can definitely see why people don't play 2, or some people don't even play 1. But the reason why I think this is so important to the deck is mainly that it's one of the only ways outside of Harp Horo that you can get your cards from the deck back to the graveyard. And so of course we play, the Armageddon Knights, the Scrap Recyclers, the Mathematicians. If you play that, we have tons of ways to get stuff from the deck to the graveyard, but those aren't searchable. this is searchable. This is a searchable way to get our cards from the deck to the graveyard, from the deck to the Banished Zone, which will allow us to keep playing. And so this is really important for the deck's efficiency, and that's why I chose to go with 2 copies of it. Another thing is that when we're playing, we want to end with multiple of the spell cards. We don't want just BAREL, we don't want just EINSATZ, and they're both searchable. And then finally we have one Orcustrated Return. And this card I also had a lot of time thinking about. And so at first I thought, you know, this is a destiny draw that you can also send from the field to the graveyard, so it's really good. It says draw 2 on it, so obviously you want to play as many as possible. That's sort of how like modern Yu-Gi-Oh, especially modern like American Yu-Gi-Oh has been lately. It's been a lot of like, oh, this card says draw 2, we should play like maximum copies of it, right? Especially since it's a spell card, it's going to make our deck more consistent, which is, you know, what we want. However, the more I played the deck and the more I tested it, the more I realized that although this card says draw 2, although it's a good card, it isn't necessarily something that I wanted to see in my hand very often. And that was mostly because I needed the World Legacy or Orcust monsters in my hand to actually play. I didn't want to discard them and then not draw them. And so it was only good when I had like excess monsters, rather than if I just had a normal playable hand. So like an example would be if you opened up with base Bombard and then like let's say Harporo. That's full combo. Like you can do a lot with base Bombard and Harporo. But if you open up those and Prime, even though your monsters have graveyard effects, using Prime makes it so that you go from having guaranteed combo to going to like maybe having combo. Like you only have combo then if you draw another Orcust monster. And so that was sort of the awkward situation that I was always put into, where like I'd have a great combo. Like if I can play this card, I have a great combo. But then I have to like put the combo in jeopardy to maybe draw combo pieces, which just didn't seem to make sense. And so it was really only good if I drew an Orcust monster and not able to like combo with it. And that just didn't seem right. Like it seemed like a better idea to maximize my ability to combo versus maximize my ability to like play Prime to draw into combos. And so Prime is a card that I still play because it's still another way to move cards from your hand to the graveyard or from the field to the graveyard. And I think it comes up more often actually in the mid game. So like on your turns 2 and 3, when you need to draw extra cards, then it's like really good because it helps you replenish your resources. But on turn 1, I just don't think it's very good. And so that's why I decided to only play 1 copy of this card. So that's it for the Orcust spell cards. Now we're going to move into some of the World Legacy spells, because again, this is a World Legacy archetype, and so it gets to use all of that support. And it can use them very, very well. And so first we have 3 World Legacy Survivors, and this card is absolutely absurd for this deck. I think it's so much better in here than it is for the World Legacy archetype that it was made for. Like it was made for crawlers, but yeah, this doesn't do anything for the crawler. I shouldn't say that, it's still a good crawler card, but it's so much better here. And so what it does is you excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can add 1 crawler monster or World Legacy card to your hand, and then also send the other remaining ones to the graveyard. Otherwise, you just shuffle them back into your deck. And then for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, if you summon from the extra deck, you can only summon Link monsters, which is no problem. This is a Link archetype, so that's really no restriction at all. But it is a once per turn card. And so what this does is that it allows us to dump our Orcust monsters to the graveyard, and then add our extenders to the hand. And so we're like dumping our Harporosa special summon from the deck, our wands, everything that we want in the graveyard, we can send it to the graveyard, and we can add extenders like Crown and World Legacy Succession that we're going to get to next from the graveyard to from the deck to the hand, kind of, but we're adding those to our hand. And so World Legacy Survivor is a really, really good card. And so something super interesting that happened was that I actually did some empirical testing with this deck, and that's something you don't hear too often from Yu-Gi-Oh players, empirical testing. But what I did was I had 50 hands, to where at the time I was playing, I think 2 wands, 2 successions, and then 3 survivals. And then I was testing to see how often I could resolve survival, and then how often it was actually helpful. And so very basic testing. And what I found was that in 29 of the 50 games I was able to combo with Succession. I drew Succession 21 times, so 42% of those 50 games pretty much. And then of those 21 games to where I drew Survival, I was able to successfully resolve it 13 times. And then of those, it was only really helpful in 7 of those games. And so 7 in 50 games, or 14% of them, World Legacy Survival was the difference between being able to combo and not being able to combo. And I felt that that was actually pretty good, but not quite good enough. I wanted to keep testing that and keep trying to raise the consistency. And so next what I tested was 1 wand and then 2 crowns, and increased the trials to 100. And so in 100 trials, I was able to do the combo. I was able to go full combo in 63% of those games. I drew survival 44 times. It was successful 26 times. And then it was the difference between comboing and not comboing about 10 times. And so in 10% of my games, again, survival was the difference between comboing and not comboing. Still pretty significant, and it boosted the consistency over 60%, which I felt was pretty significant. But I felt that we could even go higher. So this is when I boosted crown to 3. And so that allowed me to combo in 80% of the games. I drew survival 32% of the time, which is actually really close to, and that's actually really close to what the calculated probability of drawing survival would be. And then of those games in which I drew it, survival was successful 75% of the time, or about 25% of my total games. And then in about 12% of my games, it was the difference between comboing and not comboing. And so as we can see, playing more copies of Crown along with survival actually really helped. And now it's also, you guys can see how consistent the deck is, but because this wasn't just like, me playing a couple games and deciding that it was, consistent, or me playing a couple games and seeing that I didn't brick. Like, this was empirical data from a combined over 200 test hands. Very good data, I thought, so I definitely want to share that. Moving on to the rest of the deck, I know that bit took a lot longer than I expected, but I did just want to share that with you guys. We have 1/1-for-1 because base Bombard is level 1, so we can summon it with 1/1. So it's just another way to get our monsters onto the field. Then we have 1 Foolish Burial to get them in the graveyard, because again, they all have graveyard effects. Next we have 2 Allure of Darkness, very similar to Return, not 3, because a lot of times we want our monsters in our hand, not elsewhere. And so I didn't want to play too many copies of this because I found that it just wasn't as useful as I always wanted it to be, because again, if I was able to combo, then I didn't need Allure. If I wasn't able to combo, then I had to risk banishing one of my combo pieces. So it would be a situation to where, like, I have 1 base Bombard and I need to draw into Harporo. And so I'd Allure of Darkness, draw 2 cards, but I have to banish one of them. So even if I banish one, it's like, I still can't play, because I need both. And so it was only good if I had like multiple monsters, and I'd be okay banishing one, which just doesn't come up as often. And so, not 3 Allure of Darkness. Still good for consistency, it's still a deck building requirement here to make the deck more consistent, but, not something you need. 2 Caught Up by the Graves, because we are playing a combo deck, and as such, we do not want to be, bent over by hand traps. And so, 2 Caught Up by the Graves. And then finally, we have 2 Orcust Cores. And Orcust Core is another really important card in the deck, because it allows you to banish your cards from the field or graveyard, and then target one of your Orcust or World Legacy cards, and then it makes it so that it can't be targeted by card effects this turn. And not being targeted isn't a huge deal, but the important thing is that you're able to banish your cards from the graveyard, and that's really important. Another cool thing is that if another World Legacy or Orcust card would be destroyed, then you can send this to the graveyard instead. So this allows you to protect your Link monsters if you want to keep them on board. But really the more important thing that I think is protecting your EINSATZ and your BAREL if necessary. BAREL not so much, because you can add it back to your hand, but EINSATZ I think is especially important to keep on the board, because again, after turn 1, it's going to be how you stay efficient. Like being able to send from the deck to the graveyard is just such a big deal, especially whenever your opponent special summons a monster. And in the Sky Striker matchup, to where they can be summoning Rays on your turn too, it really allows you to really kind of control the things you can do on your own turn. So for example, you need to get something to your graveyard, attack over their Shizuku. Then if they summon back Ray, then you get to use the effect and then dump something, and then continue to play. If they don't use Ray's effect, well, that's good for you. You just dealt with their Link monster, and now they better have a follow-up play. And so I really do think that protecting EINSATZ is very important in certain matchups. Or really in general, actually. Again, yeah, just in general. Because again, it makes you so efficient. And so a core is definitely a card that I want to have. And so the ideal setup, I think, is if you can have BAREL, EINSATZ, and core on the field. I think that just makes this deck so hard to beat. So if you can set that up, you're in a really good position, and that's why I'm playing 2 of each of those. So let's move on to the extra deck. First we have 2 Orcust Galatia, link 2 pointing diagonally up, link 2 monster, and while it's linked, it cannot be destroyed by battle. And then once per turn, you can target one of your banished machine monsters, shuffle it into the deck, and then set an Orcust spell or trap from your deck, and you can only use that once per turn. This effect is really good because it allows you to get to your spell cards or your trap card really quickly, and again, having those on the board makes this deck really tough to beat, and it's really kind of your win condition, and this helps set those up. Next we have 2 Orcust Longirsu, which is the Orcust version of Ningirsu, and it's a link 3, and what it does is that it cannot be destroyed by card effects when it's linked, so that's pretty nice. And then you can target 2 of your banished machine monsters, shuffle them into the deck, and then send 1 linked monster your opponent controls to the graveyard. And so that effect does not target, and so that makes it pretty cool too. But what you will try to do with this deck is you try to set up your link arrows so that they're pointing to the zones on your opponent's side of the field, and then you can use this card to send them to the graveyard, and so his effect can become really devastating. And the fact that he's 2500 and can't be destroyed by card effects can make him pretty difficult to deal with too. And then finally we have 1 Orcustration, which is a link 4 monster. And what he does is that when it's linked, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. And so if you combine this with core, you can make it unable to be targeted as well, so you can really get sort of a pseudo towers if you want to. His other effect is that you can target 3 of your banished machine monsters, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, if your opponent controls any face-up linked monsters, change their attack and defense to 0 and negate their effects. And that is a permanent effect. So their effects are permanently negated and their attack and defense is permanently 0 now. And so that's a really powerful effect. Especially if this is a card that cannot be targeted, it cannot be destroyed, it cannot be destroyed by battle. Like that's just absurd. Especially considering that you can easily have multiple arrows pointing on your opponent's side of the field. And this also includes cards that not only your monsters point to, but that your opponent's monsters point to as well. It's just any face-up linked monsters, not monsters that are linked to yours. Now the only downside to this and all of the Orcust Link monsters effects is that they return cards from your Banished Zone to your main deck, and so it's very difficult to get a lot of them banished anyways. Or I shouldn't say very difficult, like your main combos will usually get about 4 banished, but really the hard thing is like after you return them back to the deck, getting them banished again to use the effect again. And so the efficiency can be an issue sometimes, and that's why I do like EINSATZ at 2, because it again helps you send them back from the deck to the graveyard or back from the deck to the Banished Zone, so that you can continue to use your Link monsters effects. Because that's what I found was a big issue before in testing. Like before I wasn't playing as many of these obviously, and I found that I could use Orcustration once, or I could use Longirsu once, but I couldn't like use both of them in the same turn, or I couldn't use like 2 Orcustration effects in a game. But when I played EINSATZ at 2 and I was able to keep getting more cards back in the graveyard and reusing them over and over, then it was able to use these effects more than once, and then it became just so much more powerful. And so all of these Link monsters have good effects. They all have their own protection, they all have quick effects when combined with BAREL, 2 of which can disrupt your opponents, and so this deck is able to produce its own defense, which is another characteristic of the best decks, and so that's something I definitely liked a lot. Next we have 1 Topologic Bomber Dragon, which is sort of a pseudo Orcust monster as much as you summon it, it could be. And I think we all know what Topologic Bomber Dragon does, but the reason it's so good in here is that because of BAREL, you're able to use your graveyard effects as quick effects, and so on your opponent's turn you can summon monsters and then trigger Topologic, and so it's very easy that you'll be able to use this effect maybe 2 or 3 times in a single turn, so it's kind of hard for your opponents to do anything under that. And so it makes it so that your opponent has to deal with it, and really not many decks can. Next we have 1 LINKURIBOH as the only Link one that we play. Very good in this deck because again base Bomber is level 1, and so what we can do is we can keep summoning Bombard from the graveyard with symbols, and then use LINKURIBOH's effect to just keep summoning it back to really just keep our opponents from dealing too much damage. It's especially good against strikers where you can make Hayate's attack 0, so it's going to be difficult for them to put damage on board, which will usually allow you to to win, because if they can't deal damage because they're usually only having 1 monster to attack with at a time, then you're going to be able to deal damage on your turn and then just get ahead in life points. Also good against faster decks to where if you can stop 1 big attacker, then that's going to help a lot. Next we have 1 Underclock Taker. For this I just wanted like a dark monster that I could link into that pointed left or right, because a lot of times when you're special summoning your links from the graveyard, they gain effects when they're linked, but none of them point left or right. And so when you're summoning them to the main monster zone, you need something else to link to them so that they become linked and get their protections. And so I found that Underclock Taker was coming up a lot there. Also, the effect to lower your opponent's attacks and then raise yours helps you do more damage, especially considering you're going to be doing a lot of it with TOPOLOGIC anyways. Next we have some Nightmares. We have Phoenix and Unicorn, both of which help deal with opposing defenses, as well as again also point left and right, which comes up. Then we have one Summon Sorceress, because we have a lot of monsters of similar types, and Summon Sorceress is a way to get them out of our deck. It can be really good for getting cards like World Wand that are hard to summon normally out of the deck and into the graveyard. It can be pretty good for that, but that's also just in general just a really useful card. I think in the Striker matchup too, being able to summon stuff to your opponent's side of the field can be pretty useful as well if they don't have Area 0 or multi-roll, so pretty good in that matchup as well. Next we have one Ningirsu, again another link monster that points left and right, that also allows us to deal with established boards. It can be really easy to summon as well. We can easily just summon this pretty much out of our graveyard, like we can use symbols to summon back Galatia, summon a base bombard, bring back LINKURIBOH, and then Galatia plus LINKURIBOH equals Ningirsu. Ningirsu can send like a BAREL to the graveyard, and then you can use Galatia to like set another one, or you can do stuff like that. That's just actually really cool. Like you can set stuff with Galatia and then use Ningirsu to send it to the graveyard, so it's pretty free. Next we have TOPOLOGIC TRISBAENA, and TRISBAENA is something that I've had sort of a interesting relationship with this deck, because we obviously have a lot of spell and traps that we want to keep on the field. We have a field spell, continuous spell, and a continuous trap, all of which we want on the field. And so having something that wipes spell and traps is sometimes not the best idea to make. However, this can be very useful against decks that require lots of spell and traps on the board, because again, with BAREL we can activate this on our opponent's turn. And so of course BAREL will be banished, and so we won't be able to do this multiple times, but we can do it one good time, and sometimes that will win us the game. And so especially against decks like Altergeist or True Dracos and sometimes Sky Strikers, or if you happen to play a mirror match and your opponent sets up their board, then you can summon this and use it to clear their board. But on top of that, it's also useful for dealing damage within the main phase, which maybe can come up if you're in time or getting close to that. And so TRISBAENA is a pretty solid option. And then the final monster that we play is the one that's probably in every person's extra deck, and that is BORRELSWORD. And then the final card that we play in the extra deck is a Dark Law, which we'll get to a tech card that I play in the side deck, but obviously it's Mass Change too. And so with that, let's move on to the side deck. And so first we have 2 Ghost Bells, then we have 2 Gameciels, then we have 2 Mass Change 2s. Mass Change 2 I like a whole lot because it gives you another way to pretty much set up defenses when you're going first, and this can be particularly devastating in certain matchups. Another thing about it is that it helps you move cards from your hand to your graveyard, which can be useful because sometimes you draw hands that you can't really play unless you can move stuff from your hand to the graveyard. And so yeah, I know I said before Prime wasn't good, but there are some hands where you need to resolve Prime. So like if you draw Symbols and Harp, for example, those 2 cards just don't interact in the hand or on the field together. And so you need another way to move one of them to the graveyard, and Mass Change 2 is one way to do that. Prime is another way, but or 1-for-1, but Mass Change 2 is pretty good in those hands. Next we have 3 Twin Twisters, because again this format can be pretty slow sometimes, so I think you need some way to end up dealing with back row, whether it be against Strikers or Altergeist or whatever. Twin Twister is something that I think needs to be in most decks right now, especially most combo decks. So very good, and again, moves cards from your hand to the graveyard, which can come up and be very important. And so it can be sort of a breaker card as well as an extender in that regard. Next we have 3 Evenly Matches. This is something I'm kind of torn on because we do have so many continuous cards, and so drawing this from the mid to late game can be very bad, but in the early game, especially when you're going second, it can be very good. And so it's so good that I felt that I'd give it a shot. But this is something that you can definitely play around with. I don't think you need Evenly Matched in this deck. Definitely not. You could definitely have some different options. And then finally we have 3 Gozen Matches, because of our Orcust monsters make us only summon dark monsters, we might as well put the same restriction on our opponents. If we're only going to play with one attribute, they can only play with one attribute. And so this is a great going first side card. if you want to be really, if you want to be really, I can't even think of the right adjective to describe the type of person who would main deck Goes in Match. That'd be spicy, but you can main deck Goes in Match if you win all your die rolls, and that'd also be a pretty solid idea. But it at least should be in the side deck, because again, everything that you summon is dark. Like, I think the only non-dark things that you summon are going to be Scrap Recycler, which you're only summoning some of the time and only in the beginning of your combos. And then let's see, just going through the extra deck one more time, the only non-darks are Phoenix, yeah, Unicorn's dark, Ningirsu. The only non-darks in the extra deck are Phoenix and Ningirsu, and you can easily play without those. And so Goes in Match literally does nothing to you. Definitely one of my favorite side cards for this deck. But with all of that, I want to go ahead and end this deck profile because it's been way longer than I thought it should be. I got a little bit excited at certain points. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If anybody's still watching, please like this video if you enjoyed it, and definitely subscribe to the channel. I definitely appreciate it, because again, I haven't been able to upload in a long time. I've been having some technical issues, and every little bit of support that you guys can give me really helps, because I need it to help fix my computers and technical systems to help me continue to put out content, and at least put out better content. Like, this took me forever to edit because my computer is so slow. What really happened is my hard drive crashed, and so I have pretty much like no free memory to use when I edit. And so because the memory is so low, I have to edit really slowly and like constantly delete stuff. Like, I have to delete like rendering files from the beginning of rendering to render the stuff in the end of the video, and let it all like load back when I export the video. It's just a lot. It's a whole lot of like BS, and it makes editing not so fun because it just like takes up all the memory on the computer, and I can't do like anything else. To where like before, when I had like an external hard drive, I could like edit and then at the same time like do other stuff for like work or something, and I could just like render and export in the background. But now I like can't do that, and so that sucks. And so again, any support that you guys can give me, I'd really appreciate it. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, watch the next video and click an ad or something. That'd be great. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys have any other suggestions, any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comment section below. If you guys want to see some duels, I'd be happy to do it, because I've been having a lot of fun with this archetype. Or if there are any other decks or new cards or new support that you want to see, let me know, and I'll try my best to make some videos about that. And so thank you guys once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.